Welcome to a new deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a truly striking chapter of ancient scripture, Ezekiel chapter 4. This isn't some quiet passage, it's really vivid, almost, theatrical. It's an account of divine communication and coming judgment.
That's right. The source material we're looking at, it focuses intensely on the actions God commanded the prophet Ezekiel to perform. It's less about, say, sermons from a pulpit and more like performance art, designed to shock and warn the people of Israel and Judah.
Okay, so our mission in this deep dive is basically to unpack these strange, very specific acts God told Ezekiel to do. What was the meaning behind them? Why were these physical things necessary? And, what insights does the source material offer about their relevance, maybe even for us now?
Well, at its core, the source highlights that this chapter is a stark warning. It's about ignoring imminent judgment. And this message was being delivered physically because, well, the verbal warnings from God's prophets, they were kind of being drowned out by false prophets promising peace. It's a theme the source actually notes has echoes in our own time, too.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this then. What was the very first thing God told Ezekiel to do? It involves drawing something, right?
Exactly. He was instructed to take a clay slab, essentially a brick, think of it like an ancient notepad,
Right.
and engrave the city of Jerusalem on it.
Jerusalem, it's Jerusalem, just so everyone's clear. And Israel and Yehuda are Israel and Judah. Good to keep that straight. So he draws the city, and this shows it under attack.
Precisely. The instructions are really detailed. Show towers, earthworks, enemy camps surrounding it, battering rams. It was like a miniature, tangible picture of the coming siege and destruction. The source really emphasizes this wasn't some vague threat. It was a visual prediction of exactly what would happen.
Okay, that makes sense as a visual warning. But here's where it gets, well, really interesting and frankly a bit odd. God tells him to take an iron griddle and place it between himself and this clay model of the city.
Yes, and then to fix his gaze on it, the source makes a really powerful point about that iron griddle. See, in that era, iron weaponry was incredibly strong, formidable, almost unbeatable. So placing this iron griddle between Ezekiel, who the source interprets as symbolizing God here, and the city model, well, it symbolized an unbreachable wall.
A wall of iron. So it wasn't just showing this siege itself, but showing that God was firmly involved, that his decision was final.
That's exactly what the source explains. This action, it was assigned specifically for the house of Israel, demonstrating God's fixed resolve. It's a profound point. God had made up his mind, and his decree was, at this point, unchangeable. The source even draws a parallel here, suggesting that just as God surrounded Jerusalem with these undeniable signs, creation itself is full of testimonies to God's existence and control. Testimonies we might choose to ignore.
Wow, okay. Setting the scene with a miniature war zone and an iron wall of divine decree. Then the instructions get even more personal and prolonged. Ezekiel has to lie down for a very, very long time.
Yes, he was commanded to lie on his left side for 390 days. And this action, according to the source, was about bearing the guilt of the house of Israel, the northern kingdom.
Lying on the same spot for over a year. What did that huge amount of time signify?
Well, the source interprets the 390 days as symbolizing 390 years of cumulative rebellion for the northern kingdom. Despite their long history of straying and disobedience, God had shown remarkable patience. This act represented that enduring patience, but it was running its course.
And after that long stretch, he has to switch sides.
He does. He's then commanded to lie on his right side for 40 days, this time bearing the guilt of the house of Judah, the southern kingdom where Jerusalem was.
And I think the source points out something about the right side here, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does, yeah. The right side is often associated with positions of inheritance and honor. The 40 days represented 40 years of rebellion for Judah. And the source highlights that Judah had been influenced by Israel's idolatry and disobedience, which led them astray too. This leads the source to a pretty powerful lesson drawn from this specific detail. Who you keep company with, who you associate with, it can profoundly influence your own spiritual journey, your walk with the Lord, as they put it.
That's a really significant takeaway. While he's lying there, first for the 390 days and then the 40, is he just passive or is he doing something else at the same time?
No, he's actively prophesying. He's instructed to fix his gaze towards the siege depiction of Jerusalem and with his arm bared, prophesy against it.
Arm bared. What does the source say about that detail? Is there significance there?
The source suggests the bared arm symbolizes strength and readiness for action. In this context, it's God's readiness to execute judgment. And coupled with this, God actually states, I am tying you down with ropes.
Tying him down, like physically binding him.
Yes. And the source explains this is yet another layer of symbolism reinforcing the absolute certainty of the coming destruction. It just hammered home that God would not be deterred. His plan was fixed.
So the message isn't just about God's immense love and patience, which we hear about a lot elsewhere, but also his unwavering justice.
Exactly. The source draws a connection here to warnings in the New Testament, like in 2 Peter chapter 3, about scoffers who might dismiss the idea of future judgment. God's justice is a core aspect of his nature, and judgment, it will be delivered at the appointed time, despite how long it might seem to take.
Okay, and the physical discomfort wasn't just his posture, right? His diet during this period sounds incredibly harsh.
Oh, it was. During the 390 days he was lying down, God gave him very precise and very limited instructions for his food and water. He had to combine wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and buckwheat all into a single mix for his bread.
And strict rations, too. 3/4 of a pound of this mixed bread a day, and only 2/3 of a quart of water. Wow, that's severe rationing.
Absolutely. A meager, really just survival-level diet. The source points out an interesting detail in the food list, too, like 3 groups of 2 items each, connecting the number 3 to the earthly manifestation of God's will, and 2 to bearing witness. So this rationed mixed diet itself was a powerful, embodied testimony against the people's abundance and their impending scarcity.
But the most shocking detail about the food, it was how he had to cook it. Baking the bread, using human dung as fuel.
That was the initial command, yes. The source explains the deep symbolism there. This symbolized how the people of Israel would be forced to eat their food unclean among the nations where they'd be driven into exile.
Because when God removes his blessing and provision, people are left in desperate, unclean circumstances just to survive. Is that the idea?
That's precisely the point the source makes.
Yeah.
And it notes God doesn't command this out of cruelty, but as a stark warning, to draw the people back. It serves as a lesson that continued disobedience can lead God to remove his hand of blessing, resulting in unforeseen hardships, even today, perhaps.
It sounds incredibly defiling. Which leads to a fascinating moment. Ezekiel actually objects to the human dung fuel part.
He does. He states quite clearly he has never defiled himself and has never willingly eaten anything unclean according to the law. The source emphasizes that this objection wasn't selfish. It really stemmed from a desire not to dishonor God through such an unclean act.
And what's really fascinating here, as the source points out, is God changes his mind in response to Ezekiel's plea.
Yes, he does. God permits him to use cow dung instead. The source explicitly highlights this interaction. It states that while some theological views might suggest God never changes his mind, this passage demonstrates that God does listen to his people, and he can, in his sovereignty, alter a specific instruction or consequence in response to their pleas, especially, it seems, when the motive is genuinely about honoring him.
That adds a layer of, divine responsiveness to this intense picture of unchangeable judgment. Okay, so finally, what is the ultimate consequence God ascribes? The result of these actions and the people's guilt.
God declares he will cut off the supply of bread in Jerusalem. The people will be left weighing out their small, anxious portions of food and rationing their water in horror and despair.
They'll lack the very provisions they had taken for granted, probably without acknowledging the divine source, right?
Exactly. The source says they will stare at each other in shock and horror, witnessing firsthand what happens when God removes his hand of blessing. They'll be wasting away because of their accumulated guilt and rebellion.
Wow. Ezekiel's life truly became a living, physically demanding, and deeply uncomfortable prophecy. Just incredible.
It was a powerful, undeniable warning delivered through action rather than just words. It emphasized the certainty of God's judgment on rebellion, while also, surprisingly, showing his patience and even his willingness to adjust his specific commands based on his prophet's righteous concern. It's quite complex.
Yeah, it really is. The narrative draws such sharp lines between disobedience and its inevitable consequences. And the source material compellingly connects this ancient warning to the ongoing danger of accepting false messages of peace, both back then and maybe even now.
It definitely challenges us to look beyond easy assurances and to examine the signs around us that testify to reality and God's will. Even when those signs are difficult or unpleasant or point towards uncomfortable truths we'd rather not face.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It reminds us that actions can often convey truth with maybe even greater force than words sometimes, and that dismissing warnings, whether they're ancient or contemporary, ultimately carries a significant cost.
And this raises, I think, an important question. If Ezekiel's actions were such a powerful sign of certain judgment for ignoring God, what kind of signs might be present in the world around us today that perhaps we are overlooking or maybe even choosing to ignore?
That is something significant to consider. This deep dive into Ezekiel chapter 4 offers a really complex picture of divine justice, human consequence, and the sheer power of embodied prophecy.
A truly impactful chapter to explore, no doubt.
Indeed, we hope this exploration has given you some new perspective today.